Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Laura, one of Kobo Writing Life's author engagement managers.
And I'm Rachel, Kobo Writing Life's other author engagement manager.
Today we spoke to author Nora Decter. Nora is a writer from Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba, Canada. She studied creative writing at York University and Stony Brook University, and in 2019 she received the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for literary fiction for her YA novel, How Far We Go and How Fast. Nora lives in Winnipeg with her partner and their 2 cats near the foot of Garbage Hill.
Our conversation with Nora was so insightful and deeply personal, and it was, it was very interesting. We spoke a lot about playing in the YA space and transitioning to adult fiction, both with characters who are 16-year-old girls. We talked about her writing process. We talked about both of her novels, How Far We Go and How Fast, and her newest novel, What's Not Mine. We talked about how winning the Emerging Writer Prize changed her life, both as an author and how it affected her writing. And just a heads up, as we head into this episode, we did speak about the fentanyl crisis and addiction. If you are not in a place to listen about those topics, I recommend revisiting an older episode of ours or waiting until our new release. But it is a very interesting conversation, and I really think you'll enjoy. All right, we are joined today by author Nora Decter. Nora, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Now, to start things off, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a writer. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and grew up like a sort of your typical bookish person or child, loving English classes and reading and being kind of shy and getting lost in books. And that led me down like my path in terms of like my education. So I did an undergrad degree at York in Toronto in creative writing and literature, and then a little later went on to do an MFA at Stony Brook University in New York. And I'm a novelist, and I have two novels published to date. So my first was How Far We Go and How Fast, the rather long title of my first book, which was YA, and won the 2019 Kobo Emerging Writer Prize. And then my most recent book was What's Not Mine, which came out in April of 2024, which is not YA.
Was there a specific genre or book that really kind of captured you and turned you into a reader? Because I know Laura and I had, other than the, publishing books, had very similar paths of being voracious readers and then going to York University to study English. So I'm curious if there was a book or a genre that really grabbed you and turned you into the voracious reader.
It's hard to say. I think I was really omnivorous as a reader at first. Like I would read anything I could get my hands on as a kid. And then, at a certain point, I guess you do start to develop your own taste, and that starts to contribute to like your artistic development. And for me, and I think that's reflected in what I write, I really like first person voicey novels. And often I really am drawn to like younger narrators. So I think of books like Heather O'Neill's Lullabies for Little Criminals and great Manitoban writer Miriam Tays's A Complicated Kindness. So both like books that have kind of that crossover thing where it is undeniably like not YA, like you just know this is like written for adults. It's literature, not to disparage YA at all. But at the same time, like this is like a young voice, right? Like with the Heather O'Neill book, the main character, Baby, is like super young. Like she's like a really little girl at first. And with the Miriam Taves, the narrator is like definitely a teenager, but it's interesting to play in that space, I think, of like, this is intended for adults, but it's told from this young perspective. So I think once I found those kind of books, I started to realize like this is something that I would like to do myself.
And as you were this young book lover, did you always know that you wanted to write a book too? Or was that kind of a later on development?
I think I knew pretty early. I'm from like a very normal family, but there are writers in my family. So it wasn't outlandish to imagine a writing life. And so the idea of writing a book was implanted pretty early on. And it seemed just like a goal that I would like never tire of, So pretty early, I think that emerged. But at the same time, there's no like clear career path towards getting there. So while I knew it was something I wanted to do, I didn't necessarily like know what the steps would look like to get there.
Now, I'm curious a little bit about your writing process. You mentioned that you were really drawn to the younger narrators in the adult fiction space. And so I'm curious, do you tend to start with a character or a voice in mind, or is there usually a story you want to tell and then you find the voice that suits it best?
I think I lean a little bit more towards needing voice to start. Of course, like there has to be some sense of like what's going to happen, but where I start to feel confident in a story seems to be like really getting to know the character's voice. So like knowing who they are, but also having a sense of like a personality in words. So it doesn't always come right away. It definitely doesn't always come right away. But once I have that, that's when I feel like way more confident in the project. And that is like the space that you want to get to, where you're like a lot more confident that it will be able to be a book that is fully realized, as opposed to like just something I'm writing that may or may not go anywhere. So like voice, and I would say relatedly like tone and atmosphere, which are kind of annoying because they're very, vague and almost new agey. Like when I teach writing as well, and when I talk to my students about like tone, I'm like, it's like the vibe of the piece, which is, yeah, like annoying and abstract. But if I have that feeling, and then again, the sense of like how this person uses words, that's when I start to feel kind of in the zone.
And we're going to touch on like both of your novels in a little bit, but I'm curious how you maintain those like younger narrator vibes throughout while making it seem like an authentic 16-year-old voice, which I know can be challenging to capture.
It is hard. I don't put any pressure on myself to have like the young people slang of the day, luckily, because I think that's can get tricky. But yeah, finding that voice. And then it's like, again, this sounds a little like hokey and new agey, but I guess writing is in ways. It's like very intuitive, but like almost like channeling the character. So whether that's like having, I often liken it to like real method acting, not like what popular culture has kind of like twisted method acting to be with like I don't know, I think of like Jared Leto like leaving rats on the set of whatever movie that was, superhero movie or comic book movie, but more so like what it originally was, which was like the actor thinking of a time in their life they'd experienced a particular emotion that the character was feeling and then trying to channel that. So while I may not be like a 16-year-old in a small town grappling with like the presence of fentanyl in my life, I definitely remember what it was like to be like a hopeless young person. So channeling that, my own personal experiences, there's always little nuggets of my real life in my books, even if the characters aren't me and have many experiences that I haven't had. So coming back to that, and then I have like every writer, like little tools to like put yourself in the mood too. So like whatever routine I'm currently trying to follow, it's always kind of shifting in terms of like what my daily writing practice looks like. But I use music a lot. So sometimes a whole playlist, and then sometimes like one song over and over on repeat will kind of, like I said, like flip that switch to put me in the headspace of my younger narrator and go to that place.
That's actually a perfect segue because I wanted to talk to you about the music in How Far We Go and How Fast. Because while researching for this episode and poking around your website, I saw that you had written music for this book because Jolene, the protagonist, and her whole family are musicians in some sense of the word. So I'm curious, this is a two-part question. One, how did music play a role in the creation of this book? Was it one song? Did you have a playlist? And then what was the writing process like creating this music versus writing for prose?
Well, in my younger years, I sort of had dual passions, music and writing. I was in a band in Toronto in my early 20s, which was like the most fun ever, although also like very emotional as it is with young people in art. And around, I want to say like when I was like 25, I was finishing up my undergraduate degree, which took me like a really long time in 3 different universities, the band broke up. And my role in the band was like songwriter and vocalist. I don't play anything, at least not well, like instrument wise. So with that like musical collaboration ending, I had lost this creative output. And on the one hand, it was positive because I realized like what I've always really wanted to do is write books, and music takes a lot of time. And now at that point, I could redevote myself to writing, and I did. But at the same time, there was like this loss at the same time, like this way that I was using my voice so that I literally didn't get to anymore. So I think it naturally found its way into the plot of that book. So in How Far We Go and How Fast, the narrator is a teenager who is dealing with the absence of her older brother, who she really sort of like hero worships and who she makes music with. So when he leaves, she is sort of left with that same sort of absence in her life, both like in terms of a family member who is really important to her world, but then also the musical component. So it made sense that both Jolene and I were kind of writing songs that were like an outlet for those feelings of like the loss of music. And in terms of like writing music versus writing prose, it's pretty similar. I think for me, I guess writing lyrics errs more on the like poetic side of my writing. If you told me to write a poem, I would never be able to do it. But if I just sit down to write prose, it'll have like many poetic qualities inherent to it. Like I said, I like voice, I like rhythm a lot in prose. So yeah, kind of just tapping into the same thing in both when I'm wearing a songwriter hat or when I'm wearing a novelist hat. It's about like, yeah, opening up to the rhythm of the words. So there's a lot in common, I think, for me.
So your debut novel, How Far We Go and How Fast, actually won the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for literary fiction. How did winning that prize affect your career, and did it put any pressure on you when it came to writing your second book?
It had a wonderful impact on my writing career. And I think it did put a little pressure on writing the second book. I remember, so, you put a book out into the world and to a certain extent, like cross your fingers. There are lots of things, obviously, that writers can do to aid the book in its journey, self-promotion and doing events, networking, all this stuff. But like, it's also kind of out of your hands. And so the book came out in September of 2018, and then it was nominated for the award in like spring of 2019. And it was super exciting. Like it had just kind of gotten to the point where I was like, all right, that's that. Like the conversation about that book is over. So even just getting nominated, as writers, I think we cross our fingers for getting like even on one list. So that was a huge boon. I was really excited. And then to win was kind of just crazy. I think I certainly would indulge in fantasies when I was like, only a writer in terms of like how I thought of myself, not like necessarily on paper. And you listen to CBC radio and hear writers interviewed and dream of like, yeah, one day having like my name called out on a stage. So it was really cool. And I think that I can always, return to that moment and feel that exhilaration because a lot of writing is so solitary. And I'm a relatively slow writer, I think. I would say it took me around like 4 or 5 years for both books and from like conception to like having an editor, say yes to it. And I think with winning the prize, I felt like, oh, maybe this attention will only last for like a month and I need to capitalize on it. But I didn't, I was in progress on my next book, What's Not Mine, but it wasn't in any kind of shape to sell, to show to people. So there was that pressure, yeah, of like, well, I've like crossed this one hurdle and had this like great success. It is like so valuable to a writer's career. But then, yeah, you worry about like, I was worrying about like making the most of any particular opportunity. And it was a good lesson in like any agent who is really going to believe in me will believe in me in a year when the book is ready to be seen. Right. So it was like wonderful fairy dust being sprinkled on my career. But then also, yeah, there's always like sort of like a darker side to any good thing, at least the way I see the world. So yeah, I had to be patient with the book, and in the end, I found the right agent and I think the right editor at the right publishing house. But there's a lot of worry in the meantime that that's going to happen and that everything will work out.
And it did. And now the book is released and in the world. So, can you tell us a little bit about What's Not Mine and what readers can expect from it?
Yeah, for sure. So, What's Not Mine is about narrator Bria Powers, and it follows her through the summer of her 16th year, not long after fentanyl has taken over the drug supply in her hometown of Beauchamp. So it's like a strange and uneasy summer all around. Beauchamp has been ravaged by plagues of insects. There are forest fires raging to the north, filling the sky with smoke, and bears are wandering the town looking for food. Amidst this, Bria has been staying with her aunt and her cousins since her drug dealing dad has taken off and her stepmother overdoses on fentanyl. And then at the same time, she's sort of living a bit of a double life. So by day, she and her best friend slash cousin Ainsley babysit and sling burgers. And then by night, Bria sneaks out to see this older guy that she meets at a bar who she calls Some Boy. And then, of course, as with any double life, it can't be maintained for long. And soon she's forced to confront kind of who she can depend on. So her family, herself, or the drugs that surround them.
The book's been called kind of darkly funny and tragic comedy. How do you balance those darker moments with bits of humor?
I think it's really important. So on paper, my book is about like a young person becoming a drug addict and being abused, but it's much more than that. And it's funny. So not losing the two sides of that, because I think even amidst the biggest challenges and tragedies of our life, humor exists and it is like essential. I have often had like in my real personal life, my socks knocked off by like someone cracking a joke at what might seem like the most like dire moment in their lives. And it's like a coping mechanism and a survival instinct. And I wanted to give that strength to my characters as well. There's also like the personality of Bria. So she's really different from me, even though we share some things. She is the like really confident, almost brash girl that you might meet. And if you're like me and maybe a little more shy, be kind of like drawn to, but also afraid of at first. So I felt like it was important for her to like greet these situations with a lot of humor. I think she prides herself on her wit. Yeah. And even like we were conscious in discussions with me and my publisher about the cover of the book, which of course it's a podcast. So I can't wave it around and show everyone right now, but they didn't want to present the book like too darkly either, because it is a teenage story and teenagers are they're not any one thing, and they're certainly not any one like mood, you know. I remember very well like the extremes of emotion that I experienced as a 16-year-old girl, and you can be like absolutely despondent one moment and then, you know, having a giggle fest with a friend the next. So yeah, really kind of like it's almost like walking like a razor's edge. And one moment she can be like totally hopeless, and then the next moment something totally in contrast to that. Yeah, so it felt very true to the character to keep it light at times, even as it's very heavy.
And we were talking about your writing process and finding voice earlier in the episode. You mentioned that a lot of it does come from your experience as being a 16-year-old girl. But you also just mentioned that you're a lot more shy than Bria is. So I'm wondering how you found her voice and how you found her brashness.
It sounds, again, so hokey, but I had been working on an early draft of this book, and it was very different. And I always slightly roll my eyes at authors who talk about characters like appearing, you know, or like knocking on the door and walking in the room and commanding their attention. But to a certain extent, she did that. Like I was just free writing around this idea that I was working on, small town fentanyl. Like I had those ingredients. I had like the bears and like setting details. And the main character, though, was this some boy character who becomes like almost the antagonist. He's Bria's like love interest, but also kind of her, you know, her exploiter, if not her abuser at the same time. And I had wanted to challenge myself to write something really different from my first book. Like I was working in third person, and I had like a 30-year-old male narrator or main character. And slowly Bria emerged. Like at first she was like a drug friend, like somebody that he partied with and kind of like a side character. And then, yeah, the voice really, really took over. So she kind of I guess, did like waltz in and speak up and make me pay attention to her. Yeah. So I guess I've really been thinking about writing lately as a balance of like intuition and that sort of hokier stuff that I'm talking about. And then like discipline and intention. So I was trying to show up for this story that I was working on, but it didn't really feel right. And then through the practice of showing up and like free writing every day, some new alchemy took over and Bria appeared.
I love that. I always find that it's so interesting when a character shows up for an author because we've done countless interviews where that's the case, where a completely different story was being crafted. And then all of a sudden the protagonist shows up and the author's like, and there it is. So I think it's really cool. Another thing that
It
you
is
mentioned.
such a relief when it happens.
Oh, I bet. I've yet to have that moment as somebody who's completed NaNoWriMo once and that is it. But maybe, maybe one day. You also mentioned the cover and how you had to strike a balance of making sure that it didn't kind of have so many dark elements. And I'm curious how much you were involved in the cover design process and the creative approvals for this book.
Sort of like almost not involved at all, but also I could have pulled the plug at any point. With both books, I was really lucky to be presented with like a first attempt at a cover that I loved. And how nice to just be able to trust the professionals to do their thing. As I said, like, I'm a writer and I make music. However, I'm not visual in the slightest. Yeah. So both times my publisher has asked me for input and I'm like, I have like some useless thing to offer. And then, yeah, have really had my socks blown off. It's kind of like one of the most exciting parts of the book publishing process for me to get that. Both times it's like an email that's landed unexpectedly in my inbox and you open it and then there's your book cover. And that's a pretty cool rush.
It
Yeah,
must
so
kind
it was
of
just
be
very
like,
lucky.
oh, it's real. It's out there.
Totally. It's so weird that, yeah, that some other creator has like matched my vision. It is like such a long delayed process that like you have to really take those moments of like it feeling like a rush when they come. Yeah, so very, very pleased with the book cover designers and art directors out there working in Canadian independent publishers. They've done a great job for me.
We talked a little bit about writing younger protagonists for adults. How did you kind of make the shift from writing in the YA space to writing adult fiction with the same age protagonist? How did that voice differ, I guess?
It's a little mysterious to me, like what the difference is. The narrators in my two books are almost identical in terms of age. Like Bria is 15 going on 16. She turns 16 in What's Not Mine. And Jolene in How Far We Go is 16 going on 17, I want to say. She's going into grade 11. Yeah. And so what is the difference? I had decided to try my hand at writing a YA book just to see if I could back when I was, sort of more in the earlier stages of my writing career. I had quit my job in Toronto, sell out my apartment, and come back to Manitoba for the summer to write at my family cottage after graduating. And that experience of the band breaking up that I mentioned and feeling like I needed to like pour myself into writing full time. And at the time, there was no internet out at the cottage. And so for entertainment, I took a huge stack of books out with me, like really huge, like 20 to 30 books. And amongst them, I have like a 10 years younger sister who was like still in her teen years at the time. And she had given me a few YA books. And I read them and had that like stupid foolhardy feeling of like, I could do that. So I decided to try. And I think at any point, someone could have told me, like, this isn't YA, you should publish it as an adult novel. And I would have tried that, but nobody ever quite told me that. There was one workshop I was in, a YA workshop, where I did get the advice to, what's the saying, to use like a 5-cent word, not like a 10-cent word, vocabulary wise. That bugged me a little bit, but I do think that there's just this slight difference between books about teenagers for adults and then books about teenagers for teens, which are of course read, like YA is read super widely by adults. But yeah, I guess I allowed myself to pay a little more attention to like form and voice with What's Not Mine, and to I don't think it's indulgent, but to indulge a little more in unconventional uses of language. Whereas there's just like a slight more sprinkling of like sort of conventionally recognizable plot elements maybe in my first book. Yeah, but I think it's like a really slim difference. I heard or I read somewhere recently like that J.D. Salinger would have had like a hard time publishing Catcher in the Rye in 2024 because they would want to publish it as YA, but of course like it fits perfectly on the shelf next to like all of these other books that we recognize as being for adults. Yeah, so I think I'd concern myself with the story and then wait for people in the publishing world to like tell me if I'm totally wrong about the category that the book belongs to. I think to worry too much about categorization would mess me up, lead me astray. But yeah, it's something I puzzle over. Like what are the differences between A Catcher in the Rye and then a book that's published in this day and age, more strictly as YA? Yeah, I think too about making something that's a little more timeless as well. So again, like with How Far We Go and How Fast, I said it really explicitly in Winnipeg. I wanted to get Winnipeg like accurately down on paper. Not that that makes it less timeless, but with What's Not Mine, it's still set in Manitoba, but I never mentioned Manitoba. Just to make it, I wanted to make it a little more mysterious in that way for people to not be able to like write it off as like, oh, it's about the middle of Canada. This is going to be boring. Yeah. So yeah, I think I just try and ignore categories and genre like that and write whatever the book wants to be.
And kind of building off of that, like you said, when you went to, like, you tried to write a YA novel after the, like, I could do this moment you had, did you have any category in mind then when starting What's Not Mine? Or did you had the character, you had the story, and you kind of just let the categories fall where they may?
No, I definitely had to let go of like what I thought I was supposed to write next. I mentioned like, yeah, wanting to write something really different from my first book, in terms of like point of view and tone and voice, and it just didn't feel right. And I had to, I think I had some sort of self-defeating beliefs about writing, like maybe a little prejudiced almost, like my favorite thing to read are like first person female narrators, but maybe subconsciously I was like, it's a little less important than a third person story about a man. And what did I end up writing? Just exactly that, like a voicey first person female narrator. And that's okay. Even just reading like the whole oeuvre of certain writers that I love, like I've mentioned Miriam Taves, who almost always writes in first person, not always, but almost. I'm thinking like Rachel Cusk also. Yeah, these really like voice-driven novelists who I love and who are celebrated. And yet I still kind of felt this like outside patriarchal, maybe capitalistic pressure to craft my career in a certain way. And then realizing like, I don't write well when I'm doing this, and letting that go.
Both of your novels tackle some pretty heavy subjects that we touched on, including loss, addiction, the fentanyl crisis. Did you find it challenging to kind of dive into these topics and not take on the weight of them yourself during the writing process?
Yeah, at times, I spoke about like a certain like channeling that goes on, like getting yourself in the headspace of character. And it can be intense. However, I think it's also really cathartic, which counters that. So, yeah, not to give away the ending of either book. And they don't wrap up, perfectly. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. But I hope that there's a sense of a grain of hope at the end of both books. Um, Again, don't want to give away the ending, but I was very surprised when I gave like the arc of What's Not Mine to my mom to read, and she confessed like the whole time through she had been worrying that Bria was going to die. And I was like, that never even occurred to me, So like, I think the emotional toll that the writing takes in terms of being dark is countered by the fact that I know that she is going to be okay. It might not be easy and it might not be perfect and it might not be okay right away, but I intend to leave the reader with hope for her. So I write with that hope in mind too.
I'm really sorry to take this onto another dark turn after you've said this beautiful thing about hope. But I'm really curious about your choice to write about the fentanyl crisis, which is like a very real thing that exists, especially in North America. And kind of, did you have to do a lot of research into like how this is affecting certain communities during your writing process? I'm just so curious how this came about.
Yeah, I started researching fentanyl, I think around like 2016, and then decided it would have something to do with my next book. Just started to hear about it in the news and was horrified. I grew up with opiate addiction in my extended family, and so had always known like the terrible toll that addiction takes on not just the individual but like the whole network around them. And then so to hear that it was getting so much worse, cap- it sounds terrible. It captivated me, like creatively. And I think that too is like a coping mechanism. When I'm going through something hard in my life, I often start to find it creatively interesting, which, yeah, it's almost, I'm cannibalizing the awful stuff around me for art. But that's what we do, I think. And then again, I try and make it funny. So not not reveling in the darkness. I was conscious of the challenge of writing about fentanyl because of how dark it is. And indeed, like, I mentioned that opiate addiction existed in my family, and two members of my family died from fentanyl overdoses last year. So I didn't know that would happen. But I also kind of sense that it might happen because if it exists in an individual, it's a lifelong battle. And then if the drugs are so much more deadly, then, a relapse is going to be so much more dangerous. So I care deeply about getting it right. I did do a lot of research. So obviously there's family experience there, but I watched a lot of like documentaries, a lot of news coverage, and spent some time early on message boards of addicts supporting other addicts and stuff, to get a feel for the like daily grind of trying to get and stay clean. If drugs are like a routine, then trying to get out of them sort of becomes one too. Like, if you need Suboxone or methadone treatment to get off of opiates at first, then it really colors your day. So like learning about those kind of patterns, having to go to a clinic every day, that doesn't show up so much in the book, but it's the kind of research that you writing teachers have said, like, you do your research and then you kind of forget about it, but it comes through in these different ways. So even if that's like not exactly the stage that Bria is at in her addiction, I wanted to know like what she had in her future of trying to turn her life around. Yeah, so I definitely immersed myself in it for a while and then stepped away so that I could do the creating part.
I think it's so interesting that you like did so much research, and it kind of ties back to what you said about hope, like looking to what was in Bria's future because you wanted to have that hope for her of what her life would look like to get out of where she was. I think that's really interesting. And I also agree that like digesting the terrible things that happen in life and then turning it into art, like I do think that, not to sound corny, is beautiful. And I think it's maybe one of the healthier coping mechanisms out there. But yeah, no, I don't know, I think the fentanyl crisis is something that is, to steal your word, kind of captivating, just how it has taken hold. I also have known somebody who has who has overdosed on fentanyl as well. So I think it's a very important subject to write about. Now I'm off my soapbox and taking a full
Yeah,
right
maybe
turn.
captivating.
Oh no, please continue.
Okay. I wish there was a word for captivating that made it like that acknowledged that it's a negative thing that one is captivated by. But yeah, and we're expected to just kind of go about our days while a segment of the population is like living this like an actual living nightmare. So helping people step out of the day to day to see that more clearly. Like I was interested in hearing all about overdose prevention awareness, the importance of like Narcan, and thinking too about when somebody is in active addiction, overdoses become pretty common. So like how do you keep going after that? Not just for the individual, but for the people around them and people working in that field and everyone involved. Yeah. So it interested me in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, I agree. We need a new word for like captivating in a negative sense that isn't just like metaphor or simile about a car wreck, because I also don't think that captures it properly. And now I'm
Yeah.
going to take a full right turn into a different topic. Because you also, like you've mentioned, you are also a writing instructor. And I'm always so fascinated by folks who can write full time while also teaching full time. And I'm curious how you balance your creative energy between giving it to your students and also giving it to your own work.
It can be really hard. So like most writers had to figure out how to pay the bills. And I've seen so many people that I've known in like writing programs. There's so many different adjacent fields that you can go into, like editing or publishing or, what have you, freelancing. And I was lucky. I didn't know I was lucky at the time, but to be forced into teaching in the first year of my MFA. And found like my sort of writing adjacent career. Like I really, really enjoy teaching. And I moved from Toronto to Winnipeg to teach at the University of Winnipeg like 5 years ago now. And I'm going to say that I feel lucky to be an adjunct. So I'm like contract staff. Don't know that anyone has ever said that before because it is it's a hard job to make a go of it at. However, the benefit is I teach usually 8 months of the year, sometimes 10, like sometimes I'll do a spring course. And then I have no responsibilities. Like I'm not a full-time prof who has to like show up during the summer months. I got like for this year, I arranged 4 months off of teaching where I can fully concentrate on writing and the activities that surround writing. So reading and researching and all of that. And I find that really works for me. I think I was thinking about for another interview, the perfect writing day recently. And I don't think, I think you have to make the most of imperfect writing days for the most part. But when I imagine my perfect writing day, it's like I've been working every day uninterrupted for a week. And then I have the perfect writing day. Like I can really sink into the zone when I haven't had other things to do, other people bothering me, other responsibilities. Yeah, so I'm able to get those stretches of uninterrupted time to write and have found that I can edit and, like revise pretty well the rest of the year, like when I am teaching, sort of in a more part-time capacity. But the like creating really benefits from that time away. Yeah, so in a surprising sense, it's good that I don't have a permanent job.
As someone who is a writer and also teaches writing, do you have any advice for authors who are tackling their first draft?
I do. So first drafts I find to be the most stressful. And I think in my writing classes, I talk about the anxiety of the blank page a lot. If you don't have that anxiety, I'm jealous and I would love some advice. But the first draft feels the most precarious to me and unsteady and unsure. And then, yeah, the revising is a lot more comfortable. So I think I have a lot of like little tricks, ways to trick myself into not being uncomfortable and anxious in getting a first draft down. And I'm also constantly learning from other writers too about new tricks. So, like I have everything from like trying to write a certain number of words per day to doing like a time limit instead. I have the one app that I pay for in my life is the Freedom app that blocks like the internet or whatever website that you want. So you're not tempted for a set period of time. And even though I think that I have willpower and I can like write for an hour uninterrupted, I will find my evil fingers like going on Instagram or checking email sort of like without my permission. So the app is helpful. I still, as much as I'm a teacher, like I still yearn to be a student as well. So I'll take a workshop. I took a workshop locally here in Winnipeg with a literary journal just last week. I'm sort of like, I think of my inner writer kind of as like a badly behaved child sometimes who needs structure and rules. And I always tell my students too that I hate writing prompts, but they're useful. But like, I'm in this workshop last week. Did I hate half of the writing prompts or respond negatively to them? Yes. But did I get something from them? Also, yes. So like, I feel like I'm a very coachable person. I was a competitive swimmer when I was younger and had that same sort of relationship with my coach where like I said, I'm very coachable. They could like make an adjustment to my technique and it would really click. At the same time, I get really mad at being challenged in ways I didn't feel like I should be challenged. So I still see that happening all the time with myself, where sometimes if I'm really annoyed at something and kind of mad and a little like petulant, I know that I need to do it. So it's like there's no one piece of advice. Like I said, this balance of like intuition and then being more deliberate seems to be what works for me.
And kind of on the flip side of that, is there anything that your students have taught you about writing or that being a teacher has made you look at writing differently?
Yeah, absolutely. My students are so smart, and there's just a new batch of them every semester, and I always have something to learn from them. I really am constantly amazed at. I think that anyone can write one good thing. It sounds maybe a little derogatory, but like I see students all the time in my classes who like don't necessarily have much of an interest in writing, but stay open to the assignments and what we're trying to do and the readings that we do and things like that. And by the end of the semester, they've written something that surprises not just me, but themselves too. So yeah, I think the knowledge that like all of the good things haven't been written yet. There's still like so many interesting ways to tell new stories. And then also, I really have found that I enjoy teaching the same. Like, I do love to bring in new things in terms of like what we're reading and talking about, but revisiting things like published works from semester to semester and trying to keep it interesting for me, constantly finding like a new quote from an author, a new piece of criticism, and just having like an evolving relationship with works that I've already read before, I find to be really sort of enriching to my own writing practice too.
I love that. Not all good things have been written. There's our quote for the episode. Thank you for that soundbite. And so as we're recording this, it is June, which means I'm imagining summer is coming up for you as far as the teaching world goes, which means you might have some uninterrupted writing time. So I'm curious, do you have any ideas percolating on what's next for you?
I do. And I'm very glad that we're doing this recording this week and not a couple of weeks ago, because I have been working on like book number 3 for I think about a year and have been like interested in the idea enough, obviously, to keep working on it, but it didn't feel right. It always, the analogies that writers make, like writing is like this other thing, kind of, they're never ending. But I've been thinking about it as like when you are dating somebody and you like them enough to like keep going, but it's not quite right and you know it. So I have been in that place, like it's not quite right and I know it place for a while. And then a couple of weeks ago, I'm just switching from teaching to being able to focus on writing right now. A couple of weeks ago, was starting to try and get into a regular writing routine and did have like, dare I say, a breakthrough. So what I thought I was working on, I realized it's about like a third of the novel, and these other 2/3 kind of emerged. And I just keep thinking in my head, it's so corny, but like keep thinking in my head the last couple of weeks, like now we're cooking with gasoline. And that keeps reoccurring. It just feels right. The way that like, the right relationship will just feel right. And what a relief. But for any writers out there, I was in the like, it just feels wrong stage for a full year. But nobody can take away the feeling when you're working on something that you're writing and you're really into it. So I'm very happy to be into what I'm working on right now.
And where can listeners find you online if they want to keep an eye out for what's coming up next?
Yeah, best place is my website, which is just noradecter.com. And I mostly just use Instagram. I do have Facebook, but every time I go on there, I'm like, oh yeah, I have Facebook. And my handle on Instagram is just nora.decter.
Amazing. Well, we will include links to your website, your Instagram, and both of your books in our show notes. And Nora, thank you so much for joining us today and for chatting. This has been wonderful.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Nora's books, we will include links in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. Be sure to follow us on social media. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram.
This episode was hosted by Laura Granger and Rachel Wharton, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and a huge thanks to Nora Decter for being our guest today. If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.